Hello and welcome to my second lecture on women in biodiversity conservation. Yesterday we did the concept and we did the philosophy and we did the various entry points for women leaders in biodiversity conservation. Today we will talk about women leaders for biodiversity conservation by discovering some luminous figures, their stories, and their impact on biodiversity conservation. So, this entails from the concept of ecofeminism that we did in my lecture yesterday and the role women can play in biodiversity conservation. So, given that our planet is burning today, this is a topic that resonates deeply with our global commitment to sustainability. Because so far, women have been the unsung heroes of ecological stewardship. They have been providing ecological stewardship, they have been balancing the wisdom of traditional knowledge with innovative solutions, be it community driven, grassroots initiatives, or be it the global policy and advocacy on the international stage. And they have been doing this with compassion, with resilience, and vision, which is a benchmark for women leadership anywhere. So, today in this lecture, we will discuss some change makers and we will explore their impact and we will try to seek some inspiration so that whatever efforts they put in, they have been putting in their times in order to conserve biodiversity. These efforts are amplified in protecting our planet's biodiversity, and in true senses of sustainable development, we can leave behind a planet that has all the benefits and all the quality of resources for our generations to come. A planet where intergenerational equity, which happens to be the crux of sustainable development, is maintained. So, friends, first and foremost, we will talk about Rachel Carson, the premier American naturalist who raised the issue of biodiversity, environment, and ecological balance for the first time. She has also been inducted to the American Academy of Arts and Letters, and she was adorned with the Audubon Medal and the Coulomb Geographical Medal. In the United States, Rachel Carson was born on May 27th in 1907, but she died young. She died young of a life-shortening cancer on April 14th, 1964. She began her career as an employee of the US Fish and Wildlife Service, where she worked as a naturalist and as a writer, and she was a field biologist whose services were engaged for content development in public science, literature, say for example, brochures and reports and promotional material. Today we remember Rachel Carson as the author of Silent Spring. Silent Spring is now counted as one of the 25 greatest science books. And although when it was published, it met with fierce opposition by corporate sector in chemical industrial businesses, and this book had a detrimental effect on pesticides because it brought general environmental concerns to the attention of the American public for the first time. So, this was responsible for reversing the national pesticide policy, and it led to a nationwide ban on DDT for its uses in agriculture, subsistence farming, fishing, etc. And this also became the inspiration. Rachel Carson's Silent Spring in 1962 also became the inspiration to lead the creation of the US Environmental Protection Agency, the very well known EPA, and we are very proud to remember her as the driving force behind this very important agency, which has been contributing significantly for biodiversity conservation. It's a divine coincidence, and it reaffirms our belief in the fact that this is a world of paradoxes, that Rachel Carson, the woman who was fighting the detrimental effects of pesticides in the interest of the general American public, herself had breast cancer, which she attributed to her work as a naturalist in areas where there was pesticide pollution. And at the young age of 56, we lost her. But her legacy remains because she was the one to inspire the deep ecology movement and also the rise of ecofeminism. You would remember in my previous lecture, we did ecofeminism as the concept for intersectionality, interconnectedness between gender and ecology, and the varied responses and entry points for men and women with nature, and how ecofeminists believe and how this movement stands for the fact that women, being more prone to care, to nurture, and to protection, are better suited for ecological conservation and for biodiversity conservation. And the two are intertwined. That if we want to conserve biodiversity, we need to enable and to maintain gender equality in the society, in institutions, in workplaces, in homes, everywhere. So this happens to be the lady who was at the fountainhead of the movement for a greater role for women to play in biodiversity conservation. Rachel Carson, greatly decorated, a life of struggle, a life shortened by a cancer that may have been triggered by pesticides, a life lived for nature, a life lived to fight the detrimental, devastating, adverse impacts of pesticides. Moving on, we have our very own Gaura Devi. We remember Rachel Carson as the lady behind the Environmental Protection Agency, the lady behind ecofeminism. She was a highly educated woman in the United States. But here is Gaura Devi, an illiterate village woman in the Garhwal Himalayas, who became the president of the Mahila Mangal Dal and went on to receive the Right Livelihood Award. She was born in 1925 and she passed away in 1991. And we remember her for the revolutionary Chipko movement or the Chipko Andolan, in which she had teamed with Gandhian leaders like Sundarlal Bahuguna and Chandi Prasad Bhatt. But it's remarkable how she could lead a group of village women who were successful in bringing down on their knees some very, very powerful timber mafia and the high echelons of political power. Chipko was the first forest conservation movement in India that began in 1973, and later Chipko became the rallying point for many other future environment movements. Now, beyond the eco-socialism hue of Chipko, it is today being hailed and taught in degree courses and in academia and researched as an eco-feminism movement. So, although many of its leaders were men, women were its backbone and women were its mainstay, because women rose to the destruction of forest, responding in creating a wall of resistance, as they knew that they will be the most badly affected by rampant deforestation in the Garhwal Himalayas. And this kind of deforestation at the hands of the timber mafia is going to affect their livelihood, availability of firewood, availability of fodder for the livestock, as well as drinking water, as well as irrigation and many other benefits of the forests. They were at the forefront of the sufferings that this kind of deforestation would cause. Hence, over the years, they became the primary stakeholders in a majority of afforestation work that happened later in the Chipko movement. And today we look up to it as a classic example of women power and how nature protection can be a tool also for women empowerment. Here are some pictures of the Chipko movement. How inspiring. Back in 1973, all these village women who had never probably gone to a school or who had never worked in an institutional space and who had probably been bearing the brunt of male patriarchal tyranny all this while over generations, who had probably inherited being the subservient homemaker in the family, being the subservient 50% population of the world, when they found that there are timber companies and people armed with machines coming to their forests to chop down these forests, and this deforestation will be affecting their livelihood, their betterment, they came and they hugged the trees with their children. And this became such an inspiring story for the world to see, that in the small, unsung, unknown, rainy village of the Garhwal Himalayas, these women have such power, these women have such courage, and these women can be so inspiring along with their children. They have the temerity to look eye to eye the timber mafia, to look eye to eye the so-called beneficiaries of development. They had the confidence in their heritage and they had the confidence in soft power, in women power. So that was Chipko, and because of Chipko, later Mrs. Indira Gandhi, the then Prime Minister, who herself was a born naturalist and who can actually be studied for the many contributions as the Prime Minister that she has made to wildlife conservation and to natural history, she implemented a 15-year ban on green felling in Uttarakhand. Thanks to Chipko, thanks to the movement led by Gaura Devi, thanks to these women of the rainy village who still are an example for that exemplary movement called Chipko. Now, having talked about the United States and India from the so-called developing world, again we have a beautiful example of a woman leading a drive, a movement for afforestation. This is the Nobel Peace Prize winner, Wangari Muta Maathai. The 2004 Nobel Peace Prize was conferred upon her for her contribution to sustainable development, democracy, and peace. She was born in 1940 in Kenya and she died in 2011. And in 1977, she started a grassroots movement that aimed at countering the deforestation, because this deforestation was threatening the means of subsistence of the agricultural population. She realized that if there won't be any forests, there won't be any means of subsistence for the agricultural population. So the campaign again made women the tool of this movement, and it encouraged them to plant trees in their local environments, and it made them aware, it sensitized them to think ecologically. So this green belt movement, of which the progenitor was Wangari Muta Maathai, this spread to all the other African countries, and a whooping 30 million trees, and probably even more than that, were planted as part of this movement. So this movement was responsible for the plantation of 30 million trees. You can imagine how the environment and ecology of any ecosystem will gain from 30 million more trees, from an ecosystem that has already been facing degradation on account of deforestation, that has already been suffering loss of livelihood on account of deforestation. So her mobilization, Wangari Muta Maathai's mobilization of African women, was not limited in its vision to work for sustainable development. She also saw tree plantation as in a broader perspective, and it included democracy, it included women's rights, it included international solidarity. Coming from Africa, she knew the importance of this. And when the Nobel Committee conferred this prize upon her, and they read the citation for the Nobel Peace Prize 2004 being conferred upon Wangari Muta Maathai, they said she thinks globally and acts locally. So her story, her journey, her contributions, her leadership of women in becoming change makers, agents of change, has been phenomenal, coming from the continent of Africa, starting in Kenya and spreading to the entire continent. And still, this figure inspires success stories for women's contribution to biodiversity conservation. Next is our very own Medha Patkar, the winner of the Right Livelihood Award and the Green Ribbon Award by the BBC, and also the Gold Environment Award. I'm fortunate to have attended a lecture in person with Medha Patkar. She's an environmental activist. She has a master's in sociology and an unfinished PhD from the TIS, Mumbai, Tata Institute of Social Sciences. And she lent support to, and she led the agitation for Narmada Bachao Andolan and the World Commission on Dams. And she has horrific stories to tell of how people in the Narmada Valley were being disenfranchised, were being alienated from their original native local rights, and how this movement helped them, and she gave her entire life to this movement. She was also behind Lavasa, Maharashtra, against unjust use of water in a farmer's suicide case. And Lavasa was actually a project for a city near Pune, the development of which involved water storage, building dams, and quarrying, hill cutting and crushing the Western Ghats. And as we all know, when it comes to the Western Ghats, we have to be very, very careful about the conservation of this ecological sensitive ecosystem, because it's one of the two biodiversity hotspots of our country, with so many endemic species and such rich biodiversity. So she resisted the Lavasa project because it was crushing the Western Ghats. Also, the Kovara nuclear power plant, Srikakulam in Andhra Pradesh, which would have been an ecological disaster for people, and then the Hiranandani land scam in Mumbai, where the state government had given land to this group of real estate builders and developers at rupee 1 per square yard to create affordable houses for the poor. But then it became a scam of 450 billion at the current market rate, because the poor were not given those free houses and affordable houses, and it finally became a proper commercial project. So a great figure, Medha Patkar, very revered. She also got the Raymond Magsaysay Award, which was conferred upon her for her services for the protection of environment, for the maintenance of natural ecosystems in their natural states, and also for the rights of the people, the local people, the ecosystem people, the villagers, the people who had been drawing their livelihoods from the Narmada waters, who were fishing in the Narmada waters, which was not duly compensated by these migration plans that the government was putting up for them. So she gave them a voice, and she became the woman behind a movement which was heard the world over. And she today is a towering example of how women can lead and how women can resist such interventions by ill-conceived development where biodiversity is destined to suffer. Next, as you would recall, we spoke about the Bij Bachao Andolan by Navdanya, which is an NGO. And in my previous lecture, we discussed Navdanya as one of the important global movements of the world for conserving biodiversity, just like the Lion Guards of Kenya in the Serengeti Maro Plains. In the same vein, we have Vandana Shiva, a scientist, basically, a physicist. She has a master's degree from the Punjab University and a doctorate from the Ontario University. She lives in Delhi, and she was born in Dehradun on November the 5th, 1952. And so far she has authored scores of books and written hundreds of articles. And Navdanya is the Bij Anna Bhu Swaraj. And she also founded the Research Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology for interdisciplinary research in environment protection. Now, this might be a discussion point for some other lecture or some other talk, but I have a strong belief that environmental problems do not have a single pronged approach. They have to be multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary, and in today's times, they also have to be transdisciplinary. If new knowledge is needed for enabling environment conservation, this new knowledge exists at the intersection of two disciplines. So environment conservation any day is not just the cup of tea of scientists or not just the cup of tea of politicians. It has to be a joint effort, and it has to be interdisciplinary. So she has thought about something great when she founded this Foundation for Science, Technology and Ecology for interdisciplinary research in environment protection. She works for biodiversity, sustainable agriculture, and IPRs. So, if you must have studied about the CBD, the Convention for Biological Diversity 1992, upon which we have the Biological Diversity Act 2002, where we are to ensure that the benefit sharing from biodiversity involves the locals also. And that is why IPR, intellectual property rights, are very, very important when it comes to biodiversity. So she works for sustainable agriculture, she works for IPRs and patents by combining sharp scientific research and very vocal activism. She's a wonderful speaker, Vandana Shiva. And she has been contributing to gender issues, which are nationally and internationally recognized. She is the author of a book entitled Staying Alive, which dramatically shifts the popular perceptions of the third world women. And she also founded the Gender Unit at the International Center for Mountain Development in Kathmandu, and was a founding board member of the Women, Environment and Development Organization, We Do. She has also initiated Diverse Women for Diversity, an international movement of women working for food and agriculture, and the movement was launched formally in Bratislava, Slovakia in May 1998. So thankfully, Dr. Vandana Shiva is alive and kicking, and all it takes is a Google search and there she is, very vocal, very active, very confidently opinionated about the role of women, about diversity, and about protection of biological diversity as a global heritage instead of losing it all to patents and to IPRs. And last but not the least, we have a theologian, because religion plays a great role in societies. Faith is always exercising huge power on how people behave, on what values, what ethics they carry, and what is dear to their hearts, and what instigates them to do something or to not do something. So here we have a theologian who was an ecofeminist too, Rosemary Ruther Radford, from 1936 to 2002, and she had an honorary doctorate from the Faculty of Theology at Uppsala University, Sweden. And she's known as the American feminist scholar and eco-theologian. Mind it, when it comes to biodiversity conservation, and we have just seen how we need interdisciplinary research and how we need interdisciplinary efforts to ensure environment protection, of which biodiversity, land, energy, climate is an important factor. So she worked on advanced ecofeminist theology, exploring the connections between the exploitation of nature and the oppression of women, something that we talked about yesterday. When nature is exploited, then women are oppressed. There is a directly proportional relationship between the two. We saw that in the example of the coastal fishing village in a small island, where women are fishing in shallow waters and men are fishing in deep waters, but it all becomes topsy-turvy when suddenly big exploiting trawlers from fishing companies arrive, employ men for days. They have too much fish and women are rendered jobless, and the age-old heritage character, gender equality, is disturbed. So she found connections between exploitation of nature and oppression of women, and she advocated for an integrated approach to social justice and environmental sustainability. Although Rosemary Rosemary Radford has written several books, her very influential book called The Gaia and God, an ecofeminist theology of earth healing, is notable. We also saw how the Gaia hypothesis, considering when we were looking at the divine feminist connotations of the earth being the Gaia, being the virgin, being the mother earth, being the mother nature, and in Hindi, the Bhudevi, the Dharti Mata, etc. So she, in this book entitled Gaia and God, an ecofeminist theology of earth healing, she explores the relationship between ecological well-being and human responsibility. So this book, it emphasizes the need for a harmonious coexistence with the earth, and Rosemary Radford, she argues that patriarchal structures contribute to environmental degradation. And hence, she has called for transformative theology that respects both women and the natural world. She was also behind the movement where, being a Christian theologian, she fought for women becoming priests, women solemnizing marriages, and women actually even becoming popes. So she has authored 36 books and over 600 articles, and she's also worked as an activist for environmental justice. So friends, looking at the role these illuminating figures of history, women leaders for biodiversity conservation, be it our very own Vandana Shiva, Gaura Devi, or Medha Patkar, or be it women leaders internationally, Wangari Muta Maathai, be it Radford, or be it the pioneer Rachel Carson, what we have is now gender sensitive considerations in multilateral policies. The intersection of the Sustainable Development Goals, we all know about the Sustainable Development Goals, they have replaced the Millennium Development Goals, and we have to achieve these goals by 2030, these 17 goals. The SDG 5 is on gender equality. Also, the SDG 15 on life and land. These two goals highlight that advancing women's leadership and involvement in biodiversity initiatives fosters environmental resilience and sustainable development, something that we have been saying right from the beginning of these two lectures. Further, there are these three conventions on climate, land, and biodiversity, and they are also gender sensitive. So, the Convention on Biological Diversity, the United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, and the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. All these three major Rio conventions, they have gender sensitive considerations, redefining the role that women can play as change makers, as entities being at the direct interface of agriculture, of water, of farming, and as that gender which is more sensitive towards life, towards nature, and towards biodiversity. So I hope this has given you some understanding of the role women can play in biodiversity conservation, and I hope this has inspired you to be supportive and to be positive about creating, enhancing and expanding more space for women in biodiversity conservations as well as various roles in the society, because when they have these roles, they will do it in the feminine way, and that will be a way that is sustainable, that is environmentally stable, and that is conservation oriented. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the very best.